It was funny. He gave me a big hug. He weighs 150, 200 pounds more than me. And he was a complete rock star the entire time. And he picked up my brother's granddaughter and held her for a picture. So we have a picture of David Ortiz holding my great niece in his arms, and because that's what he was doing the whole time, shaking hands, kissing babies. It was tremendous.
Tim Kurkjian covers baseball for ESPN, but Tim, I think moving forward, we have to change that intro because you're a Hall of Famer. Congratulations.
Well, thank you, Buster. That was the most overpowering, overwhelming, unforgettable weekend of my life. That was the greatest weekend of my life professionally by far. And just to give you an idea, not dropping names, but this is how it works on weekends like this. And someday soon, Buster, you'll have the same day. But I'm sitting on the bus driving from the hotel over to the ceremony, and the guy comes up to me on the bus and says, "Can I sit next to you?" And it was Sandy Koufax. So I sat next to Sandy Koufax.
Holy crap.
And talked to him for 15 minutes, just him and I. And as you know, Buster, he was a great basketball player. So since I love basketball also, I figured this would be the best way to start a conversation with him, even though I know him. So he was showing me his really big hands and how long his arms are, and explained that's why he could dunk it at when he was only 6 feet tall and everything like that. So that's just a little snippet of how the weekend went. You turn the corner and, hey, there's Johnny Bench. Hey, there's Sandy Koufax. Hey, there's Paul Molitor. It was really, really cool.
Yeah, and of course, Sandy Koufax played at the University of Cincinnati. So you knew him ahead of time? Tell me about that.
Yeah, I've talked to him several times. I've interviewed him several times, I just felt like this wasn't the time to ask him about that great curveball he threw, or, going 97 and 27 his last 4 years. I thought he might be more interested in talking about something else. So we talked about basketball and the NBA and everything else. It was great. And, earlier in the day, of course, I talked to Johnny Bench, which I did quite a bit. Real quickly, Buster, at the party on Friday night, Johnny Bench walks near my table where all my family is. And I said, "Johnny, could you come over and meet my brothers and all that?" And he goes, "Sure." He said, "Let's get some pictures." So I assume that meant that we were going to gather around him and have somebody take our picture with Johnny Bench. Instead, he pulled out his own camera and started taking pictures of my entire family. There's Johnny Bench, the photographer, taking pictures of my family. And then we said, "Johnny, look, we need a picture with you. You're the greatest catcher ever." And he gets in with us. He hands the camera to somebody else who takes the picture of us. And that person was Paul Molitor, who got more hits than Willie Mays. And now Paul Molitor is taking pictures of Johnny Bench with my family. That was one of those moments where you just went, how could this be happening to me?
So I think I saw that picture. We had a lot of our colleagues who had jumped into that picture at some point. Was that on Saturday that picture?
Yeah, we had a big personal party on Saturday night, and Johnny Bench came to the personal party. And, all my knucklehead friends are there. All my family's there. And here comes the greatest catcher of all time. And people were just huddled around him. He talked to everybody. So typical of him. It was absolutely amazing. And I should never tell you, especially this, Buster, but at lunch on Sunday, Johnny Bench, I'm sitting next to him. He takes out his Hall of Fame lanyard and says, "I want you to sign this for me." So
wow.
I gave my signature on Johnny Bench's Hall of Fame lanyard, and then he looked at my signature and goes, "What is that? That's the worst signature I've ever seen." And he yelled at me. I deserved it because I have the worst signature anyone's ever seen. But still, Johnny Bench, the most playful, fun guy who makes the Hall of Fame all worthwhile. That was really, really special.
So I'm going to keep torturing you on this conversation. I want to ask you about, because you and I have known each other for 35 years or whatever the time is, that had to have been difficult because you are accustomed through your work and your training for decades of not making yourself the story, of not being in the middle of it. And yet over the weekend and, the beginning of last week, you became the story. How did you cross over that Rubicon? And I ask that earnestly. I'm not trying to make fun of you, but that had to have been a difficult process for you.
Yeah, that was one of the hardest things I've ever had to go through because this is not supposed to be about me. It's never been about me. And this weekend it was. What got me through it was Cooperstown got me through it. In other words, a bunch of my family and friends had never been to Cooperstown, which of course is this ludicrously charming town in upstate New York. So people went to the museum. They had never been there before. They had never walked down Main Street. They had never been to an induction ceremony. So I kept thinking, thank goodness this isn't entirely about me, because these people have made, this is like a bucket list trip for some of these people. My son Jeffrey, his father-in-law, just finished a trip in Cooperstown where he went to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, the Football Hall of Fame, and then finished in the Baseball Hall of Fame. So it was way more than let's go watch Tim talk for 16 minutes. It was let's go visit a place we've never been before. And it was just breathtaking for them. And that's what got me through, because otherwise it was so difficult for me.
So I can tell you this, like the conversation about this secret caravan going from Bristol up to Cooperstown to surprise you on Saturday. And I apologize, I wasn't there. I had a personal circumstance that I wasn't able to make that trip. But it was so cool, like all the arrangements that were made. Kelly Carrier, a great friend, works behind the scenes. Carl Ravitch talking about it. Phil Orland's talking about it. And I've heard you were completely shocked when that group of folks showed up.
Yeah. And again, Buster, I just dropped you, Johnny Bench, Sandy Koufax, Paul Molitor. But honest to God, the highlight of my entire weekend was going into a room for lunch. And I was just told we're going to go eat in here. And 20 people who were not supposed to be on that trip were in the room. And I started to cry again. It was so kind of them. They got in a bus and drove 3 to 4 hours to come see me. We had lunch for an hour and a half. They got back in the bus and they went back. That was without a doubt the highlight of my entire weekend, because my dear friends that I work with took that kind of time, made that kind of sacrifice just to come see me. I cried like a baby, and I'll do it after this podcast again.
So tell me about making that speech. They were, Carl and Eduardo were talking before Sunday Night Baseball about you practicing that speech 1,000,000 times and almost trying to wash as much emotion out of it as you could, so you could get through the 15 minutes.
Yeah, I probably did that out loud at least 200 times, at least, including 5 times on the morning that I delivered the speech. I just chose not to look down at my notes. I wrote the speech. I memorized the speech. I did it 200 times in my head. I said it out loud. And then when I went to the podium, I was still terrified. Buster, I've never been that nervous or that scared doing anything in my entire life. And I just said, please, just words, please come to me, like they did in all the times that I practiced. And fortunately, they did. I got emotional a couple times talking about my brother and my mother and father. It's impossible not to. All 200 times that I did that speech, even when I obviously just alone doing it, I cried every single time. And I cried when I made that speech. But I kind of cried afterwards because I was just so relieved it was over, because the stress and the pressure was just all self-imposed, but it was enormous.
Well, and we're going to hear your whole speech coming up here in a minute on the podcast. But I would say this, again, I know you well enough to know that you had a phenomenal time over the weekend. And I bet you, as you guys were leaving Cooperstown, you were so relieved.
It was great. I remember driving in on Wednesday afternoon thinking, okay, finally, this is it. The week has come. But the time from Wednesday afternoon to Saturday afternoon, it seemed like it was 3 months, because it just wouldn't come to the time where I could finish. And then after I finished the speech, then all the weight was lifted. And Sunday was just a spectacular day. At the ceremony, watching those guys go in. And then, yes, when we drove out yesterday morning, There was this enormous sigh of relief that as much fun as I had, the greatest professional weekend of my life, I was glad it was in the rearview mirror because I knew now I can now look forward to some other things because this has completely dominated my thinking since December 7th, 2021.
All right. So you don't have to talk about yourself anymore. I want you to talk about what you experienced on Sunday, watching those speeches and a lot of, David Ortiz and Jim Cott, Tony Leva, and others being inducted to the Hall of Fame. What jumped out at you?
Yeah, well, first off, Jim Cott was so eloquent. He was so good. He was a perfect leadoff man, explaining, the first time, he went to a baseball game, Lefty Grove was pitching, or Lefty Grove was his hero. It was unbelievable. And he said, I want to be one of those guys. And he made up his mind to do it. Tony Oliva was hysterically funny, in part because he had broken English, which made it so good. I learned so much about Bud Fowler that I didn't know. I thought I knew Buck O'Neill pretty well. I learned so much about him. Gil Hodges' daughter made a tremendous speech and told me several things I was not aware of. And of course, David Ortiz was great at the end. So it was a very educational day for me. It was hot as it could be, but I was totally comfortable just sitting there listening to those 7 guys go in. It was absolutely spectacular.
Well, and knowing you probably had a blanket on along, even though it was 96, because you have a hard time keeping warm. Tell me about a personal moment you had with David Ortiz over the weekend.
Well, I had several of them. I can tell this now, and I'm not trying to. I saw him at the All-Star game, and I said, David, I'll see you in Cooperstown. And he goes, are you coming to see me? So I'm not sure he realized that I was going there for another reason. So when I got there, we had a big chuckle over that. It was funny. He gave me a big hug. He weighs 150, 200 pounds more than me. And he was a complete rock star the entire time. And he picked up my brother's granddaughter and held her for a picture. So we have a picture of David Ortiz holding my great niece in his arms, and because that's what he was doing the whole time, shaking hands, kissing babies. It was tremendous.
All right. As you know, a week from today, we'll be in Bristol. It'll be the trade deadline. That's going to be the focus for the next week. It's all around Juan Soto, and I know you were busy with events in Cooperstown. So I just want I'll give you some of what I've learned in the last week. The Padres, to me, the most motivated team in the conversations for Juan Soto. I think the Cardinals, the Padres are the most motivated team. The Cardinals are the team probably most capable of making a deal because of the absolute volume of high-end, major league ready players that they have. I look at the Mariners as being a sleeper because they have a chance to make the playoffs for the first time since 2001. And the conversation among executives that I speak with, they think it's, it probably breaks down to about 75, 40 or 25% in terms of who thinks Soto is going to go and who thinks this is about Mike Rizzo just gathering information. And I'll tell you this, it's really interesting. This particular deal, because it's being made by Mike Rizzo, the perception of how he makes trades is he targets very specific players in other organizations and really just keeps working on that team as opposed to casting a wide net and circling back and circling back and circling back with each of the teams and trying to goose the offers. And I think what everyone is wondering, what is Mike Rizzo thinking? So what's your guess as to where we are here?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm with you on the Padres. To me, they have the biggest need. And just imagine, as we've talked about, trading for Soto, Tatis Jr. comes back. Those three with Manny Machado hit 1, 2, 3 for the rest of the year. I'm on the 75% group that I think he's going to get traded in the next week. I don't know how it's going to happen because it's going to be a mega deal of all mega deals. But obviously, if you trade for him now, you can get him for this postseason and the next and the next. I would think you could get more for him right now than you could after the season, like at the winter meetings, or before next season, or certainly this time next year. But so I think I'm guessing, of course, I think he's going to get dealt before Tuesday for that reason, that Mike Rizzo, who's very smart and very shrewd, will look and say, all right, I might not get this spectacular deal a year from now. I'm going to do it now.
And I think the biggest clue that we can draw upon, and the question of whether or not he's going to be traded or not, is based off what Rizzo told us earlier in the season. If you remember, in mid-May, you and I had conversations about Soto and whether or not he might be traded because of the ownership situation. And Rizzo's response to this whole conversation at that time was, we're not trading Juan Soto. How can I make that more clear to everyone? I don't know. People aren't believing me. Well, he's done a 180 on that, which I think is a sign that behind the scenes, the ownership transfer is playing a major role in forcing this to a decision.
Right. And that's, again, why I think I'm guessing that he'll go before Tuesday, because clarity of the ownership situation is critical here. They have to know as soon as possible, is he with us or isn't he with us? And I think that will affect all of the ownership situation. So that's why I think it makes sense. And you're right. Mike Rizzo was telling the truth. I'm not trading Juan Soto until 440 million got turned down. Ownership situation changed. And now he has to speak differently on this because everything has changed in the last 2 months.
Yep. And we don't know what his marching orders are, but I don't think there's any doubt that whatever those were in mid-May, those have been altered. All right, let's look at the American League standings and how that might affect the buyer sell conversation of some of the teams. You have the Jays, the Mariners, and the Rays kind of separating themselves a little bit in the wild card race, 3-4 games ahead of the group of Cleveland, Boston, Baltimore, and the White Sox. Take me through the thinking in your mind of those 4 teams, Cleveland, Boston, Baltimore, White Sox, as to be buyers or sellers.
Well, I think the White Sox have to be buyers because they cannot have this kind of expectation, especially after last year, and they give up at the trade deadline when they can not only win a wild card, they can still win their division. So,
and can I jump in too? I'll jump in here on this too. They're in the most winnable division.
Right.
Like, it's not like they're chasing a juggernaut.
Right. There is zero chance they are giving up in any way on the season. They will add, not subtract. Not so sure about Cleveland, even though they've done exceptionally well getting to this point. I see the Guardians being buyers, but not significant buyers. I see the Orioles not unloading any of those key players.
Really?
Mullins, I don't think so. I think they owe it to their fans, and I think they're going to hang in there for a while because I don't think they're going to get enough for, say, Trey Mancini to justify trading him. That's what I think. The Red Sox, to me, are the fascinating team, Buster. They have had a horrendous last week, if not 2 weeks, and something has to be done quickly. I don't see how they can give up on this season either. But Chaim Bloom is not the kind of guy that's going to go out and unload all his prospects to get one player that might or might not get them into the playoffs. They're in big trouble right now. It'll be fascinating to see what happens, but I don't think they're going to sell off. I still think they're the Red Sox, and they have to buy, not sell.
Just to double back on a couple of those, the Orioles, Jorge Lopez. If you're running the Orioles, he's your all-star. But as we know, relievers are like hot stocks. And when they have value, you typically move them on. If you're sitting and running the Orioles, what are you doing with him?
Well, again, I say they don't trade too much, but let's face it, with all due respect, as great as he's been this year, this is his only great year that he's had. And if they can get something for him, I think he's the kind of guy they move. But if they're going to win it all moving forward, they need Santander and Hayes and Mountcastle and Cedric Mullins. Those are the guys I'm saying they're not going to deal, nor should they. But if Lopez goes, I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah. And again, within the context of how relievers are viewed by teams, you look at a guy like David Bednar of the Pirates, Joe Manaply of the Diamondbacks. To me, if you get a reliever that has value in a moment, you don't feel like you're in a position to contend, then you should take advantage of the value. Yes?
Absolutely. And, the Yankees just lost Michael King for the year. That guy's really good. They are really going to miss him. And they're not going to hold off the Astros. They're not going to beat the Dodgers in the World Series unless they fortify now with the injuries they've had. So, yes, I think there will be a very strong bullpen market because there are so many bullpen arms that can make a difference.
So what I'm hearing about the Red Sox is that they could be both buyers and sellers. JD Martinez is out in the trade market, and the perception is that he might be the most likely veteran to get moved, in part because he's in the last year of his deal. This is probably the end of his time with the Red Sox here in the next few months. And with the DH now used in both the National League and American League, you probably have teams that would be interested in taking him on. And you can fill a DH spot and still contend. You could draw from guys they have internally. Maybe Bobby Dahlbeck moves over to the DH spot, and they see if he can, find himself there. You trade for a better defensive first baseman. What I was hearing yesterday is that the Red Sox at the moment are not inclined to trade Xander Bogaerts. A, they're still hanging in the edge of the race, and B, I think they want to keep that channel open to potentially re-sign Xander moving forward.
Yeah, look, Buster, they need to do whatever it takes to make the playoffs. But more than that, they have to keep Xander Bogaerts somehow, one way or another. And they have to keep Rafael Devers also. I personally don't see how they're going to keep both of them. I'm not sure I know they want to keep both of them, but that should be their number one responsibility, is making sure the left side of the infield doesn't go anywhere. So whatever deal they make at the trade deadline has to be with keeping Bogaerts and Devers long-term. Again, not going to be easy.
I must say, I think among all the teams in baseball, I feel like we're going to learn more about the Red Sox in the next week than any other team, because if they did trade Bogaerts, my question, if I were a beat writer covering that team on a daily basis, would be to Chaim Bloom, to Sam Kennedy, to John Henry, who are you going to pay? You didn't want to pay Mookie Betts. You traded him to the Dodgers. If they trade Xander Bogaerts after giving him let's face it, was an embarrassing extension offer in the spring, you're not going to pay that guy who has stated he wants to stay with the team. Who are you going to pay? And that, the information we got from the Boston Globe, I think it was Alex Spira wrote this story, that in the negotiation with Devers, the Red Sox used Matt Olson as a comp by offering Devers the extension that they offered him, which I personally think is ridiculous. Matt Olson's an all-star. Rafael Devers is one of the 5 best hitters in the game. I don't know how you could make that comparison, but if you're the Red Sox, you got to pay somebody if you're a big market team.
Right. You got to pay Devers. He's 25 years old, Buster. Look at that track record. Look where that guy is going. How are you going to justify letting Rafael Devers go? Again, I would make him the number one priority, but Xander Bogaerts has been a critical guy on that team. And you're right. Who are they going to pay? They have to pay both. Otherwise, the people in Boston are going to be pretty angry about this. And I can imagine what Dan Shaughnessy would write about that.
Well, Tim, thanks for doing this. Congratulations. I was so proud of you over the weekend. I loved hearing the stories.
Well, thank you, Buster. And thanks for all you've done for me and everything during this process. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live streaming sports and premium content, subscribe to ESPN+.